Greetings, everyone. My name is Alckemy. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to do my best not to waste your time. This is the Serum versus Faceplant video, and there are a lot of things to discuss. I was not really sure if I wanted to even make this video just because I feel like Serum 2 has honestly done a really good job at making it stand out on its own. But if you're like, yo, I gotta have one or the other, then this video is for you. We are not going to be doing a lot of sound design, but I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to pull up a lot of patches that I've already made and kind of just do my best to show you the pros and cons and talk about the workflow behind them. But if you're just like here for the answer of like which one should you pick, my personal bias is still towards Faceplant. With that being said, I think that we can go ahead and open up with just talking about what's new about them or what's different. And then we'll talk about some of the other stuff regarding workflow and I guess similarities, because at the end of the day, they still are subtractive synths, and that means that they, from more or less, or they can do like 90% of what you would want each one to do. It's just which one do you prefer? Which I'm curious to know. Let me know in the comments what you think. All right, on to business. So the biggest stuff between Faceplant and Serum 2, if you look at these, is this has unlimited oscillators and effects. This now has unlimited effects, I believe. If you use their extender, I guess was what we would call it, like Snap Heap or Multipass, then Serum Effects 2, I think, only has 32 effects, but you can just use another instance of it, and so to speak. One of the things with this that you'll notice, though, is that the workflow of effects is much more compact compared to how big everything is here, and that's a big key point for me. I also, I guess, should bring it up that you can't see all of your views at the same time, and that's probably going to be one of the biggest things with Serum 2 is that there are so many tabs. 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 tabs. Now, technically speaking, you could argue that this has multiple tabs, but the cool thing is that if you do pull something up, you can still keep the original view in here. So you get what I'm saying? It's a lot easier for me personally to navigate. The other thing that you'll notice is that if you do use an extender, these have their own sets of modulators where something like Serum only has 4 envelopes and then I think 10 LFOs. And these can be converted in between randoms and stuff and whatever. This does not have an unlimited amount of modulators, but I've only maxed out maybe a few patches, so to speak. I think Requiem 2 is when I really went ham on all of the kits or whatever. So if I pull something up like this, yeah, you can see that I've kind of just gone absolutely bonkers. And we'll talk more about that later. So one thing that I don't really appreciate, or one thing that it just drives me crazy, is when people talk about the workflow speed of Serum versus this. So I guess, in essence, you could argue like, yeah, okay, you have to pull up 1 or 2, oscillators in order to get this thing going. But whenever you pick FM or whenever you're trying to do routing and stuff, it's kind of all sporadic. The main thing that I love about Faceplant so much was actually from their update, which is if I route something to whatever, look, I can see where this is going. And regardless of how you paint this picture, if I open this up here and send this, it's only when the respected LFO is pulled up that I can actually edit the modulation. So if I pull this up, I can't edit it. It has to be over here. This gets really tricky and kind of annoying even if I set something like LFO2 to LFO1, because what this means is that I have to go here and then I have to do this. I have to drag this out. And you can see like that's not even working. Oh, maybe I have to do it on this one. Sorry. Yeah. So if I go here and pull that out, you have to actually drag this out like this in order to get this to pull up, or you have to go into the matrix tab and then finagle with a completely different, I guess like fader or value device, which is kind of difficult to determine. This is kind of strange as well, because if you're doing something like LFO, say to the master pitch, this is on a percentage base as opposed to giving me, pitch values, so to speak. Whereas if I'm doing something on this, which you might be able to do, I haven't tested. So before we get into it, if I come over to whatever and I go semitones, I can actually type in the semitones here to be extremely precise with how I want this to be. And so there is no matrix table, but everything that you want to know where it goes is already in front of you. That's a really big workflow enhancement that You know, it's great. It would be one thing if this was like semi-modular, of this being like, okay, all the knobs and, you know, the lines are going in completely different places or whatever, but it disappears unless if you pull it up. And that's, again, just extremely helpful for me. So some things that they have that are very different are the way that they treat spectral stuff. I'll say that this does not have any spectral synthesis, but it does have a few spectral effects, I believe, or maybe even just one, which is the filter table. There's not really anything quite like this. I mean, I think that there is one synth. I want to say shout out to Databroth. He was telling me that Europa has something like this, but this is a spectral filter to where you can make a wavetable of a filter in order to really just create your own custom shapes, which is just awesome. This thing is so cool. And I would say, like, even if you end up going with Serum 2, this is worth having on its own. The other thing is the customizable distortion, which is in the shape of a wavetable. There is also the shaper to where technically Serum does have this. So if we go to distortion here and we go to, I believe, asymmetric or X shaper, one of these, then you can actually create a custom curve, but it's not a wavetable by any means. I don't actually know if there's a way to fade in between these. I think you can. So there might be that, which is kind of cool. And I guess in some cases that's a similar thing, but I would prefer this instead personally. The other thing is that some of the behavior of the way that some of these work are a little bit strange. For example, if you set soft saturation on the edge of like the last thing of your chain, this is technically a clipper, but it works as a downward clipper to where it'll try to keep everything from going above -6 unless if you just push it insanely hard. If anybody knows if there's one of these distortions that will actually push it up to just 0 without it getting too insane, I would actually like to know, because I've been finagling with it and haven't found one myself. Speaking of, there are also tabs on here to where you can do busing, but one of the issues that, you know, is like this again is the tabs, right? So you technically have 8 tabs. With this, if you want to do some kind of busing, say, let's say we've got something here, we go send this to analog or lane 1, we go send this to lane 2, and then we're like, yep, there we go, whatever this wants to be, and then they can both join up in lane 3 or be sent out to the master. That's the workflow of how this works. That's really hard to beat. When it comes into like FM and stuff, it's kind of the same deal. You can utilize this and just tell it where you want it to go. Some people complain that there are no warp modes, but that's why you have wavetables, because wavetables create the warp. So essentially, when we look at this stuff, when we look at all of these things, these are just more wavetables, pretty much. Aside from one unique one, which we'll talk about here in a second. But I mean, provided that you just do something like this, you can just use whatever wavetables that I think are available. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that there is a bunch of these that are already built in the presets here that you can already use to kind of achieve the same thing. So yeah, shouldn't be that big of a deal. Okay. Let's talk about some other unique things. There are some unique modulators on here that Serum 2 does not have. So for one, there's the audio follower. There is pitch tracking on some things like filtering in Serum. Actually, I think that you can do pitch tracking across the board. There's also MPE across the other two. There is technically remapping, although I prefer this one because this is just like, hey, here's one remap, and then you can send multiple things to this and be able to utilize that. This is available in the matrix table via here, to where you can create this kind of stuff, which is pretty cool. It's just another thing that I have to kind of scoot over to do though. And then there is the wavetable LFO. So where's that at? LFO table. This is great because what this means is like, and I kind of just want to make a point about this, that obviously I'm biased, but you have to realize that it's objectively just freaking awesome. You can either pick a wavetable or you can make your own wavetable in here. And the thing is that whatever table you make between the LFO table, the wavetable here, the shaper table, the filter table, like they can all be applied to each other. I don't know why that I said that so strangely. They can all be applied to each other. And so you make one wavetable and that is applicable to everything else. That's such a boss move. And I love that. Likewise, I think that some stuff that this has that Faceplant does not have is the spectral oscillator and also a multi-sample oscillator. So you have to use SFZ, which, by the way, if we go to SFZ maker, I did find one to where you can make this stuff. Maybe if this will pull up, and I do think that this is worth mentioning because I actually had to have someone in the comments explain this to me. But if you type in SFZ, there's a bunch of free ones here to where you can use the multi-samples to pull this up. Excuse me. And also there's another neat little feature that I didn't know about, which I believe is in the granular. If we pull something up like factory, whatever, I think that you can right click this and then go into an auto slice mode, which that's pretty cool. This does not have that. It does have a sampler. It does have a granular sampler. Sorry, that was a wavetable. But it doesn't have something like that to where you can map out different parts of the sample like this. You can technically make it if you wanted to. And so what you would do is you would use a remap of the sort, and then you would set it to, like, I don't know, chromatic or quantized or whatever. And then you can distribute the pitch along the different playhead of a position. So if you just do this, you can change the position of something like that. This actually is functional, but it's not quite the same, and it's not going to play the original pitch of whatever this is. It's going to play the pitch up and then be mapped across the board. You can lock the, I guess, the notes or whatever, but that is a little bit more setup, and I definitely have to give Serum credit for something like that, which is a really interesting thing to do. There's also some cool sample processing that you can do in this apparently, which I have never even tried, but that exists. In any case, with the spectral device, it has a unique warp mode as well, or a couple of unique warp modes over here that are these things, which is like these robotize, shift, shepherd, comb, pitch shift, phase twist, formant, mask, and vocode, to which this actually doesn't have. And that's kind of why I was a little bit averse to doing a comparison in the first place, just because these are starting to really stand out on their own for some really cool things, and I think that it would benefit anybody from having both, but what can you say? So some other unique things about this are the filters, for one. There's a bunch of different filters on here that people have been trying to recreate for a long time. I would say the reverb filter is something that is a fan favorite. The scream filter as well. There we go. This one. A lot of people use this for a lot of other stuff. The other thing, which is kind of a disappointment, it's nice that it's here, but I don't know, it's just kind of strange, is that this has a filter morpher, technically. And what you can use on this is something like this, to where you can create these different snapshots. I'm just going to try to do this very quickly. And make them kind of polar opposite, I guess, or something like that. Never do this, by the way. Please, never do that in context. But within this, now that you've kind of made this vector here, you can kind of morph between these. And this is kind of cool to create nice vowels or whatever. In contrast, this doesn't have a parametric EQ. And so something that I do a lot when it comes into, I guess, what do you say, like filtering or bass design, is just creating a shape like this and being able to use this to create vowels, kind of like so. The other utility with this is that you can actually utilize this for a dynamic EQ, because you can use an audio follower on this to say, okay, well, whenever this hits, I want this to bump, which is extremely useful for things like kicks and whatnot. And because of that, this is like one of those things that I wish that were included within something like Serum 2. Well, what can you say? The next thing that I want to talk about is the MIDI stuff, which for the most part, Faceplant doesn't really have hardly anything other than some pitch changing, whereas this has some really cool clip stuff to where you can actually, in essence, like make a song in here if you wanted to. Not a song, but you can make a beat. I guess you can technically do different clips and have different parts, but it would be a very basic song akin to working in something like, how would you say, Machine or whatever. And because of that, I guess it would be worth mentioning that even though this has limited engines and whatnot, you can actually spread each engine out across the keyboard to almost play something like, it reminds me of something like Omnisphere, to where you have multiple instruments that are laid out across the keyboard, which I actually think is pretty cool. I have this stupid drum and bass thing that I enjoy showing off just for this. But if you take a look at this, this is just a very basic pattern. But if we hit play, as stupid as that is, it's actually pretty silly because this is mapped to a multi-sample, which is mapped to a bass, or there's a bass, and then there's like a little melody thing or whatever, and then that's just like a showcase of, you know, whatever it is that you're doing. And something that is also unique about this is that you can actually just drag this out if you want to where now we have the MIDI, and then you can also just put stuff in as well. This has keyboard shortcuts, so if for whatever reason it's not working, you can highlight everything, Control A, and then just paste this in here. And so if you've got, you know, some chord progressions and stuff that you like doing, for example, one thing that I'm working on right now, which I don't think is as good as Faceplant, but is kind of cool, is that I have this perk 2, and you'll see that I've got these banks of rhythms in here in order to be able to, you know, kind of just come up with cool little loop ideas. You know what I mean? And it's just stuff that I can utilize for that and introduce other things on here to be able to utilize. Now, you've probably been waiting for this, but the key killer feature for Serum, in my opinion, is this guy right here, which is the export. So very quickly, if I go into a new patch just to kind of, you know, the killer thing is that you can set up either a spectral or a sampler or a granular or whatever. I can hit one note. Then I can actually resample this into itself. And so because of that, there is this like very fast, unlimited kind of resampling approach that you can utilize both into a sampler, a wavetable, any of these actually, except for maybe the multi-sample, because there's not really a reason to try to upload that into that. That is a killer feature for 100%, which is so cool. In contrast, whenever we talk about things that work really well for Faceplant, the main thing that got me on this in the first place, sorry, I'm trying to make this bigger, is kind of the same philosophy, but in the patch workflow itself. So we already talked about wavetables. We already talked about, you know, how it continues to give back. And that kind of tends to be a trend throughout lots of other stuff. Let me show you. So I make these patches, not trying to sell you on anything, but just here is something that is food for thought. You'll notice that I have multiple racks like this that I utilize for a bunch of different things. So I make patches that, you know, kind of does everything. Percussion, pads, switch over to the granular, plucks, glitch, metallic hits, and sub. There's not really anything like this that this can do compared to any other synth. At least if you could say in Contact or, you know, something else, or I don't know, some people bizarrely even mention Falcon, which don't even get me started. Actually, you can check out my Falcon versus Faceplant video. I think I was too nice on Falcon, to be honest, but what can you say? But aside from being able to do this and do it very quickly, if I were to start over on a brand new template, so let's just say I pull up the Requiem 3 template, you'll see that all of these are pulled up, but what I can do is just swap out the racks, kind of like so. And now because all of these are still mapped here, you know what I mean? They don't even need to be the same kind of thing. There is this Lego style of patch building that if you take the time to build something like this, which is all self-contained, then it tends to show itself up in other patches as well. Now, I guess in some cases you could, you know, do that with Serum 2, but that's kind of where those shortcomings come into play, because if I were to utilize something like Serum 2 effects, which I actually have never pulled this up before, so I better check before I say anything. Yeah, so I guess in some cases it's nice that you do still have the envelopes and stuff, but you still need to pull it out and it affects the routing chain. So that means that you would have to go through the Serum 2 effects within this before you get into the next batch, before the next batch, before the next batch. Whereas with this, It's all kind of self-contained. You know, if I want to move this and send this here first, I can do that. If I want to make it parallel, all I have to do is drag that and say, okay, which one do I want this to go to? You know what I'm saying? So the free routing of this is much more flexible in my opinion. And regarding the sequencing stuff, sorry, I do have some things that you can utilize. For example, if we pull up something like Dreamcatcher, you'll see that, let me see actually, where is it? Here we go. You can do things with LFOs. You can also do things with remapping to where you can set something to a scale. And so there definitely is a way to do sequencing. There's a way to do randomized sequencing. It's just not as elegant as something like Serum 2 or even something like Pigments, to Pigments' credit. But that's not to say that you can't get some really cool stuff. That does bring me into another point. I do think that objectively, I would 100% say that Serum sounds better on paper than in Faceplant. I think that one example of that would be, let me pull up something from Ecclesia, and let me pull up something from the Bass Playgrounds. And so let's pull up something like a wow wow. So if we were to even compare something like Neurobass to this, if I pull up the complex, I have a sound kind of like this. Which I think sounds, you know, it's pretty cool. I think that the timbre of it sounds really good, but I also don't think that it sounds like as full and fulfilling as this. Likewise, with something like this, if I were to pull up, where are we at here? First, where's my neuro stuff? Here we go. So if I were to pull up something like this, this actually doesn't have as many effects, and it's a little bit more quiet, but I do think that the timbre of this is a little bit of a higher quality, but both of these are pretty much just saw waves. Sorry, let me switch over to this one. So we can go here. I think that this just has a better timbre. I would say that even though this doesn't have as many, you know, warping effects and whatnot, it just, yeah, I think that this is just sounds way better. And that's because I would like to believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that a lot of the DSP of this is focused on, for example, the effects are like relatively simple and not really focused on being the most high quality effect, sans for the this stuff, because I actually would say that the premium effects really are a game changer for this synth. However, I do think that the DSP on this is a little bit more, I don't know, it's meant to impress, long story short. So you kind of have to have this understanding of what these do and kind of be like, all right, well, do I want something that is relatively limitless, or do I want something that's kind of like a cheesecake, even though it's a little bit more, I don't know, cumbersome to work with, if that makes sense. I'm trying to think if there's anything else on here that I want to cover. There isn't really that much. In essence, I would still pick Faceplant over Serum, provided that you have the budget, to which the Faceplant suite, which I do think is totally worth it if you can afford it, which is either $10 a month, which is rent to own, or $4.99, versus Serum, which is a free update if you already own Serum, or $250 after the sale. Right now, I think it's on sale for $189. There's kind of this, I don't know, for me personally, I'm really honestly happy that I have both, because there are certain things that I like to explore. So for example, I like that I can use the spectral thing and resample things into the spectral for creating, you know, specific sounds like metallic leads or just like weird atonal, I don't know, percussive sounds. Whereas with this, the workflow behind this, the ease of use and the way that it continues to kind of just give back and just create insane means of exploration, right? It's really hard to step away from something like this, especially if you're already used to it. Excuse me, I need a drink of coffee. There might be a couple of other major features or something that I haven't really covered, but I'm somebody that does sound design a lot. I spend a lot of time doing sound design. I spend a lot of time doing music. This is my full-time job. So, in my experience, with these things, you do have to keep in mind that it is a preference. The other thing that you have to realize is that there's a reason why I, pick the things that I do. Like even with the synth tier list that we recently did, you've got the Pigments guys that are just like besides themselves seeing that I put it in something like mid or good or whatever. And it's like, dude, okay. You know what I'm saying? It like everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I'm also not the kind of person that just does this for YouTube for the views. You know what I'm saying? It's like we actually sit here 4 days a week, 5 days a week for multiple hours doing stuff like this. In that, I would also kind of argue that there are some things that you would argue with Serum 2 that do have a better workflow. If sequencing is your thing and you are not doing probably what people like me are doing, which is like, insane rack building and all that, I don't suspect that most people are doing stuff like this, with all kinds of crazy sounds or whatever, multiple racks, blah, et cetera, et cetera. Trying to not say blah, blah, blah anymore. But you know what I mean? I'm assuming that most people are not doing this. You're probably just doing like very basic saw wave with some reverb and a delay and, making a cool trap lead or whatever. No disrespect. But the thing is with that is, how do I say this? Your needs are probably going to be very different than what mine are. And so because of that, you might be like, yeah, I just want to use the clip launcher to, get a melody going and then play that and have that be fine. But for me, I did this video not too long ago where I pretty much just remade Serum inside of Faceplant. You know what I'm saying? Because this is very easy to do. You can, in theory, just go like this, just make a quick list of everything that is in here, and then you're good to go. And then you can save that as a template if you really wanted to. But I really don't want to hear people being like, oh, Serum is faster, has a faster workflow than Faceplant. Like, that's just not true, objectively. It isn't. You can't change my mind. I've literally got both of these synths up here and I've used both. Designing a snare in this was absolutely abysmal, and I'll tell you why. So with something like this, the problem that I've had with it is not even so much with that you can't make a great snare in here. It's fine. But the problem with it is that when you are doing these mappings here, you can only view one modulator at a time, for one, which is actually more trouble than you might think. The other thing is that when you get into the fine adjustments, you have to start bouncing between this and the matrix table in order to kind of get and fine tune the dialing of what you're wanting to do. That's an issue for me because snares in particular require a lot of finesse, in my opinion. I mean, unless if you're doing like a jank snare or whatever, but for the most part, whenever I'm doing these kinds of things, like the difference between, and this is going to seem stupid, but this is kind of like a smacky snare, but take a listen to this. The difference between this and this is a very big difference. You know what I mean? And that's why drum design is so hard in the first place. The amount of adjustments that you have to do comparatively are, quite frankly, a lot. And so for me, with all these things, part of what helped me actually become a better sound designer was being able to have this like insane granular control of everything that I needed to do to make this work the way that I wanted it to. I've realized like the years of refinement of how I've come into like making drums that I'm happier with is from those Goldilocks adjustments. And just maybe with Serum 2, it's just a lot harder to dial in because maybe I'm not used to the envelopes and the LFOs or whatever, but also objectively, I have to get into the matrix table here. Likewise, if I'm trying to, use that workflow like I was talking about with the insane, resampling experiments and stuff, like there's not really anything faster than this, to where you can just be like export, boom, export, boom, export, boom. If you're trying to work within a granular sampler and you want that slicer, that's a really big deal. That's a big feature. And so it's kind of hard for me to be like, oh, well, one is better than the other. It's just kind of a means of what I prefer, right? And so, Serum would be for you if you want something that has just the unique features like I described. I would say that for everything else, for like most quote unquote electronic or subtractive synthesis design, this would be my go-to. It's just too fast. It's too fast, it's too quick, and maybe you don't vibe with it, which is totally okay, which is what I've heard from some people. But that is really just like, you just got to get used to it. I'm not going to say it's a skill issue, because you definitely have to like have your brain reframe the way that you need to look at making this your thing. But if you do, I'm telling you all, like, it's really hard for me to say that Faceplant is anything other than the best synth on the market. Sorry, I didn't mean to be dramatic with that. I was just trying to make sure that I was being clear and not saying I would say that Serum 2 is a relatively close second. It does some really good things, and they fixed a lot of the issues that I had within the first synth. And to be honest with you, I'm probably going to be using Serum 2 a lot more, just because I think that, honestly, I think that there's a market for the preset packs and stuff. Whereas with this, I've got tons and tons of banks for this. Like I don't want to say rinsed, but I have so many banks, probably more than 10 for Faceplant. If anyone's interested, that's at alchemy.com. And then for me personally, I would be doing this. But when it comes into other things like, creating percussive generators and stuff, I don't think that that sounds as good. I don't think that it's quite as meaty. For example, if we play this one, which this took me hours to design, by the way, where in Faceplant it took me like 20 minutes. But if we take a listen to this stuff, I guess that would be cool to do some comparisons. Yeah, like half the time it's not even percussion. I did do a second one, which I did find a cool trick to make this a lot easier on myself. I guess I'll just leave you all with that. The trick to it is to use a utility at the end here instead of using envelope 1 and trying to make that retrigger. But mapping LFOs to LFOs is kind of a nightmare in this. It's not very fun. But, excuse me, yeah, you can do it, and you can get some sounds. I just find that this is a little bit more samey in comparison to the sounds that I get in something like Faceplant. And, I know that I said 5-10 minutes ago that I think that Serum sounds better, but the thing with it is, like, I don't know, there's still going to be some certain things that I would reach for in comparison. Yeah, I tend to prefer this one a little bit more over that. Designing Neurobase is not too bad. So if we take a look at that Neuro 2 designer that I did, it is slower by all means, but it's not the worst if you keep it relatively simple. But in essence, I have, distortion and filtering and stuff. And then because Serum 2 finally has a frequency splitter built into this, that means that I can focus on, doing that cool effect stuff to where we add like a notch here, phaser, comb filter, flanger, all that stuff, and then distort it through the end and whatever. Like, making neuro stuff doesn't have to be as hard as the things that I see that you see me do, but to get it, in essence, like, in my opinion, from something that sounds pretty okay to something that sounds freaking sick, you do need to start going the extra mile. I think a great example of that would be, and sorry if this feels tangential, but it's still relative to me. I have a quick and dirty one, which, let me find it. Quick and dirty 2. So if you just take some distortion and some notches and some EQ, something kind of like this, I'm not even doing frequency splitting, then you can get really close. This is kind of like a 5-minute thing. But when it comes into, the other stuff, you kind of need to go the extra mile a bit and start, stacking more effects and getting more creative with it, tastefully, of course. But when it comes into this, One thing that I kind of just don't really like is that for this, I can only see one lane at a time. The other thing is I can't move this. I don't know if this is a bug or whatever, but you have to move everything around the splitter. This will not move. And not only that, but you can't collapse this, which makes no sense. Which also, something that doesn't make sense is that you can turn everything off kind of like this, but there's no mute or solo. There's also no like turn off the effect rack either. So, you know, I'm kind of like, what? That doesn't make sense. Why does this not exist where I can just be like, oh, turn that off, turn it on. You know what I'm saying? There are small little quirks like that that kind of really get into the interaction behind that. Making pads and all that should actually be, yeah, it should probably be a little bit more easy to work with inside of Serum because of the resampling thing. So if you take a chord, or let's say you take a complicated waveform, sure. Let's go ahead and move back over to this guy. And okay, sorry about that. Demon screeching. We just take that. I don't think that's going to take the chord, but we can pull this into spectral or granular, whatever, and pull that in. There we go. I think it only takes one note. Oh no, it took the whole chord. And something else that's kind of cool about this, as you can see, is that it actually labels the chord for you. So if I were to turn this off and send this into some reverb, it's very quiet, sorry. Then we can do this again. And we can kind of do this again and again and again and again and start to create like lots of really cool different timbres with this to make, you know, neat stuff. So that's, yeah, that's why I guess in certain cases that's hard to compare, you know. In any case, I'm trying to think about if there's anything else that I want to talk about, but I would prefer drums and bass design in Phase Plan. I would prefer the spectral stuff in Serum 2, or just like the creative resampling process or whatever. I don't like making a neuro bass or whatever and then using rolling sampler to drag it out into the timeline and then drag it into Phase Plant. It's not nearly as efficient, but I don't know. It's up to you. That's what I would say. It's really difficult to be like, you should get one or the other. I'm personally sticking with Phase Plant. I make almost all of my songs in it now. So what can you say? But what about you? Tell me why you think either one is the better choice. Have I sold you on, you know, changing your mind on what you were thinking about getting? There's that. Yeah, I'm trying to think about if there's anything else. Yeah, I guess one thing is that this also has a key and scale mode, which I don't personally care for, but it is a thing. Yeah, if that's, you know what I mean? If you, I guess if you're a beginner or something and you need to key lock something into a scale, this actually has scales on it, but it doesn't lock you into a specific note. So if you use the remap, you can go into a minor key or a scale or whatever to where an LFO will play an arpeggiator or arpeggio or something. But if you change the note, it's going to play, like, if I hit C, it'll play Gregorian Mixolydian, but then if I hit G, it'll play G Gregorian Mixolydian, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So let me know what you all think. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. And check out alckemy.com if you like my sounds. And I will see you all in the next one.